introduce Rachel Horner. Rachel is visiting lecturer at the John S. Knight Institute for Writing at Cornell University. She's also the assistant director of the Cornell Writing Centers. She earned her PhD in music and sound studies at Cornell University. Her research centers on the intersection of sound, landscape, language, and identity. Not landscape, but language. Especially in cultural festivals of Spain and Latin America. We're about to hear her talk about her ethnographic study of Valencia's Fales Festival, which you were listening to some of it, getting you enticed and ready and in the mood. Her scholarship takes an intermaterial approach to language, noise, music, and silence to reveal how sound sustains shared meanings, relationships, sense of place, and memory. As you know, and as we are excited to share with the world, Rachel will be starting in the fall of 2026, joining us in the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology as a visiting lecturer. That is worth now the second part of my introduction, just highlighting the fact that we're getting a really good teacher, not just a scholar, but a teacher. Rachel's first degree is in music education. She has a New Jersey K-12 music education certificate. She was instructor of record at both Cornell and Rutgers, teaching classes not only on topical courses on carnival, festival, ritual, introduction to world music, but also on theory and pedagogy, and the first year writing seminar. She has been a student teacher and a substitute teacher for grades K-12. She has multiple awards for excellence in teaching. In addition to her scholarship that we're about to hear, she is somebody who cares deeply about teaching, and that's really important. That's why it's such a gift to have her here. For us faculty members, we're going to have another dedicated professor joining us. For you graduate students, you're going to have another mentor, and some of you may be working with her as AIs next year. And especially for our undergraduate students, Rachel will help us maintain our high standard of robust and popular classes that are going to be offered at the undergraduate level. So join me in welcoming Dr. Horner.
We're going to do a quick costume change. Please excuse. We're attached. Can you hear me? Maybe? Kind of? Let's raise it a little bit. Great, okay. Thank you so much for that introduction, Pravita. Thank you all so much for being here. I truly, despite my obsession with writing, could never possibly find the words to express how grateful, thankful, absolutely overwhelmed and floored I am to, first of all, be in this room, standing in front of all of you, ready to talk for some number of minutes, but way more importantly and way more amazingly to be here for the first of many, many times. I feel so grateful. I truly don't have the words. There's no words that are correct. So just please believe that it is true, and I am so deeply grateful. The talk that I'm going to offer today is part of what, until a couple days ago, was my dissertation project and is now my book project, right? And so this is one of the many sounds that I study in the soundscape of the Fades Festival, this festival that I have dedicated the last 9+ years of my life to. So I'm also equally excited to share this work with all of you, and I really look forward to any conversation that can happen around it. So here we go. For 5 days, every March, the Fades Festival transforms the city of Valencia, Spain, into an open-air exhibit of fireworks shows, food stalls, wind band parades, and most notably, massive monuments that rival the city's buildings in size. These artworks, called Fades, are designed to represent and parody popular national figures, major world events, and local references in clusters of individual ninots, or figurines. And this one that you see here, every figure is disconnected from each of the other. It's not a sculpture, they are a collection of small figures. Usually ranging from 3 to 20 meters in height, these larger-than-life masterpieces tower over festival goers on street corners and intersections, contributing to the artistic festivalization of the city. The magnitude of these monuments juxtaposes starkly with their transient nature, however. Following a year-long construction period, the falles are escorted from artists' workshops into the city and erected on the first day of the festival, only to be set on fire at the festival's conclusion. I know, let it sink in. The progression from planta, mounting, to crema, burning, carries out a cathartic social critique of the figures that the falles depict, allowing festival participants to extinguish the previous year's problems and start a new falles cycle without the burdens of the past. I take the incendiary impulse that underpins the falles festival as a point of departure, to explore the ways the festival and its participants pursue modes of preservation that exceed and challenge the typical archival obsession with material permanence. Building from the work of Diana Taylor, I ask how our conception of the relationship between archive and repertoire might change if we deny the archive the material stability on which its claims to authenticity and durability rest. What remains in the archive when its material elements are not only destined for, but constructed with the aim of destruction? Though the material elements of Valencian falles may seem to constitute the archive that the festival facilitates, I argue that these are merely vehicles for a different kind of archive to come into being, one that I call the intangible archive. The intangible archive emerges from moments of perceived disappearance, what I call cycles of presence and non-presence, through the repeated intermaterial cultural expressions of each year's festival that elicit, establish, or maintain the feelings, beliefs, and behaviors that make these same expressions possible. It relocates the site of archiving to the very practices that create it, allowing for an understanding of the archive not only as a physical location where material objects or their traces can be encountered, but as an epistemology through which intangible and affective forces can be perceived. Today, I trace one such intangible archive in the daytime pyrotechnic displays that populate the falles festive calendar. I'll take this as the moment to warn you that there will be some loud things going on from here on out. I grind to a halt at the barricade of bodies that separates me from the epicenter of this afternoon's fireworks show. My excitement grows as the crowd packs together, acquiescing to its own current. At the cost of any sense of personal space, I settle a few buildings away from City Hall as sunflower seed shells begin to pool at my feet. My pulse spikes as the final warning shot ripples out the plaza at precisely 1:55 p.m. I steady my breath, and my focus drifts to the familiar tune broadcasting in the distance that echoes in the whistles and hums of those around me. When 2 o'clock strikes, a garbled announcement from the festival queen and princess summons the first firecracker. Sir Pyrotechnician, you may start the Mascletà. Conversations around me dull to a whisper as blasts of firecrackers ricochet against my sternum. At first, clouds of colored smoke punctuate the sky, but in only a few minutes, there is no sky left. The wall of gray reminds me this is all about the sound. I recall a friend's advice and open my mouth wide to diminish the impact of the explosions, to no avail. And with this, I surrender to the sound, my body resonating in tandem with the rhythm of rumbles that reverberates from City Hall. The explosions are so powerful that I no longer distinguish between sound and feeling. I can reach out and touch the noise. As the 5-minute mark approaches, the controlled cacophony crescendos until the pavement shakes below me. A gasp of silence unsettles my rattled senses for a moment until a thunderclap of clustered firecrackers envelops every molecule in the airspace around me. This is the Mascletà. Every afternoon from March 1st to 19th, a barrage of carefully coordinated firecrackers fills the plaza outside of the City Hall of Valencia, Spain, with cloudbursts of colorful smoke and a cacophony of thunderous blasts. This pyrotechnic display, the Mascletà, is named for the masclets, or firecrackers with a wick, that bring it to life. Because it happens at midday, the Mascletà cannot rely on the nighttime canvas of typical fireworks shows. Instead, the manipulation of explosive sound prevails as the primary creative force of the Mascletà, a force best perceived through the chains of sounds and silences that structure the pyrotechnic display. The individual compositional choices that pyrotechnicians make in their designs mean that no two mascletades are alike. Nevertheless, as a genre of pyrotechnic art, the Mascletà is defined by a consistent internal structure as outlined on the following slide. So as you'll see here, it's quite complex, but it does follow this general structure where orange is sort of the beginning part of it. It begins with that traditional line of firecrackers that goes all right in a row. That's called a traca. You'll also see all of those words in Spanish that are sort of onomatopoeias of what the sounds actually are of the firecrackers that are making those sounds. So even the firecrackers themselves are defined by sound. This yellow and lighter orange section is the middle, where you might hear the most variation in what happens, because it's where they really show off with the different effects that they may use, the different firecrackers they have access to. And then this green section is what we just heard in that last video, with the beginning with the earthquake, where the whole ground shakes with bass that clearly doesn't translate in a room like this or in a recording like this. I promise it actually shakes the ground and your body. Then the bombardment, which is all of the stuff that happens in the air and sort of takes over like a bombardment might. And then most importantly, actually, are these two concluding firecrackers. I say most important because they are most important for the pyrotechnicians. If they hear any other firecrackers happen other than these two, they know that there was a mistake in the show and something else had to be detonated at the end, which is a sign that you messed up. So they don't like it. So, as this chart makes clear, creative control over explosive sound is the defining feature of a mascletà. The Mascletà is undeniably noisy, and as Valencian anthropologist Francesc Llop i Bajo puts succinctly, noise is typically construed as a sonic aggression that upholds an us versus them dichotomy. We are never the ones who make noise. Noise is always made by the others. But if supporters of the Mascletà also embrace the pyrotechnic display as noise, the Mascletà would seem to invert this conventional dichotomous interpretation. For pyrotechnician Vicente Caballé Ramirez, the Mascletà is a symphony of noise. Playwright Antonio Gala Velasco has described the Mascletà as a comfortable chaos, the greatest nonsense in the world, but with rhythm. Journalist Manuel Casaña Tarancher explains that once you experience the Mascletà, you won't want to miss a single decibel of this delirious whimsy of fire that unites light, color, and noise. While it's worth acknowledging that a Mascletà regularly reaches between 130 and 140 decibels, far exceeding the intensity considered safe for prolonged exposure, I argue that making the seemingly easy leap from understanding the Mascletà as noisy to understanding it as noise requires going beyond metrics of decibels alone. Greg Hange asserts that more than an annoyance to be eradicated, noise is an index of the relational ontology according to which the world comes to pass. Because it always exists in relation to what it is not music, not a signal, not information, noise is the expressive marker of relation itself. Noise's very ontology is defined by its relationality. Following this line of inquiry, I argue that the Mascletà is a noise that makes its traces of relationality perceptible through repeated performance. These relations, deeply entangled in the community ties that make up social life in and outside of Valencia, are neither uniform nor stable, and it is through the Mascletà that these relationships are negotiated. While spectators often discuss the Mascletà in terms of sound, the many other senses that it activates, the visual effect of smoke overtaking the sky, the feeling of the earth shaking beneath one's feet, the smell and even taste of gunpowder, are all fundamental to the all-encompassing experience of the Mascletà. Tracing the relational network that emerges in the Mascletá's noisy performance thus requires a multi-sensory approach to noise, one that I develop in this talk through the Valencian Catalan term sentir. Notably, not the Spanish word sentir, Valencian Catalan. According to the Valencian Normative Dictionary, the word sentir has 6 main definitions. To perceive through the senses, generally with the exception of sight. To perceive through the ear, to hear. To experience an impression, a feeling, pain, or pleasure. To regret or feel sorry, a sad or painful event. To be aware of one's own state. And to have the feeling of something, to experience the consequences of something. While the meanings of sentir can be approximated in English through sensing, feeling, experiencing, and importantly, hearing, the Valencian Catalan term encompasses all of these meanings at once, and thus is the ideal hermeneutic through which to perceive and convey the Mascletá's noise and the relationships it archives. The polysemic nature of the word reveals the friction between understanding the Mascletà as sound and acknowledging the many senses the Mascletà activates. To understand the Mascletà as and through sound is not to deny its rich sensory palette, the tactile, olfactory, visual, gustatory, affective, proprioceptive, vestibular, interoceptive, and other senses that it can stimulate. Rather, as a sound that is felt heard, my chosen translation for sentir in English, the Mascletá's noise always already contains its multisensory potential. The Mascletà thus offers a productive lens through which to gauge the multisensory nature of noise more broadly. If sentir helps to recognize noise's capacity to operate on several sensory planes at once, it also reconciles the experience of the Mascletà with the feelings and beliefs it creates and sustains. When listeners experience the Mascletà, they hear more than noise. They feel here the relationships that noise indexes. They feel here the generational relationships that sustain a centuries-old pyrotechnic tradition. They feel here the regional ties that uphold the Mascletà as Valencian sonic heritage. They feel here their own relationships with the city around them as the built environment becomes a resonating chamber. Through its multisensory performance, the Mascletà activates an intangible archive of relations and the values that uphold them. In my approach to the Mascletà, I decenter the ear as the sole threshold through which noise's effects can be perceived, calling instead for the recognition of the sentir space that emerges wherever noise's intangible effects are made manifest through material means. I reconcile the multisensory work of sentir with what Francesc Llop i Bayo calls the sound space, or the grouping of sounds produced voluntarily, or at least with permission, by a community that reflects its values, that is to say, its way of ordering time, space, and the group itself, and also its sonic values, sounds and silences organized to mark, build, and reinforce the community for its members, and above all, for outsiders, to members of other communities. If the Mascletá's sound space reflects the sonic and communal values it performs, the Mascletá's sentir space names how these values are felt, heard, and by whom. The sentir space locates the limits of the Mascletá's capacity to communicate shared values and defines the relationship that its noise archives and indexes. Today, I trace the Mascletá's sentir space across time, space, and medium. We begin at a pyrotechnic manufacturing site where family ties are woven with the threads of pyrotechnic history. We continue to a protest at Madrid's first ever Mascletà, where calls for animal rights and environmental protection come up against an out-of-place festive tradition. We conclude with a sound art installation whose attempt to distill but not recreate the Mascletà reveals the forms of listening that make collective identity possible. Across these stories, I search for the communities that cohere around the Mascletà through an affective, feeling hearing that mediates continuous and often opposing forces of sonic belonging. It is these forces that coalesce to form the Mascletá's intangible archive, its noise signaling the intermaterial relationality that sustains the Valencian community. The narrow dirt path leading to the pyrotechnic manufacturing site signals the rather desolate landscape to come. A tall barbed wire fence guards an array of small white workshops and a larger two-story building, the latter of which bears the company's name in navy blue geometric lettering. A voice calls out from the distance, Raquel! This is surely Nuri, the owner of Pirotecnia Nadal Martí, and Simba. Nuri greets me with a double kiss, hardly lifting her cheek from mine before jumping headfirst into a tour of the property. We enter through the front office, which, in addition to housing meticulous logs of the company's inventory, showcases photographs from the Pirotecnia's past. Oh, this was an exposition we did at City Hall Plaza, she explains, lowering a frame from its hook. It wasn't that long ago, but look how there wasn't even distance for safety. The people got right up next to the firecrackers. This must have been the early 70s. As I continue to scan the walls, Nuri notices my gaze lingering on a sepia-tone photograph of 4 women seated at a small square table. Spools of twine wrap around the 4 corners of the table, each ready for the women to unravel to tie together clusters of firecrackers by hand. This town has a rich pyrotechnic tradition, you know, Nuri says. Look, the town chronicler prepared an article tracing the histories of all the pyrotechnic companies that used to operate here. Nuri pulls a photocopied document from a stuffed file folder, her voice softening as she admits to me that Nadal Martí is the only remaining pirotecnia in Darjeria. As I skim the article, Nuri retrieves a small black binder. According to site regulations, she explains, I have to register my visit in the visitor log. For a moment, my imagination invents the dangerous scenarios that might warrant having a full record of those present at a pirotecnia on any given day. But I comply with Nuri's request and fill the empty columns with my name, passport number, reason for visiting, and today's date. Adjoining the main office is the primary storage facility for the tubes of vastly varied widths and lengths that will eventually be filled with gunpowder and other pyrotechnic chemicals. Nuri takes me aside to demonstrate how the firecrackers for the Mascletà are rolled. Beginning with what resembles a toilet paper roll, she wraps the cylinder twice in colored paper, twisting the end into the signature candy wrapper tail. Nuri's motions are swift and precise, her clean folds and confident pace putting her years of experience on display. I take this opportunity to ask her about her formation as a pyrotechnician. Well, it all started when I married a pyrotechnician, she laughs. The first thing I learned to do was tie wicks and firecrackers together. I love to sew, which made that a natural starting place for me. I can fill firecrackers with gunpowder and do other tasks when necessary, but really my specialty is tying. I can show you in the workshop. People often comment on how quickly I can tie, but it comes from years of practice. There's no school that teaches you this stuff. You have to learn as you go. Time teaches you where things could go wrong, and you learn from that intuition. Having seen most of the main building, we venture out into the dry, dusty earth that surrounds the property and encounter a network of workshops that stand at a regulated distance from one another. As we approach the first one, Nuri touches her hand to a metal plate affixed to the exterior of the building. This, she teaches me, removes electrical charge from one's body before entering a potentially differently charged workshop. The interior wall displays a chart specifying the number of workers who can safely occupy the space at once. 2, in this case, who are fast at work preparing firecrackers. A collection of tools hangs on the opposing wall near the window, under which stretches a long wooden workbench strewn with twine, mallets, and cardboard. Rows of colorful twisted firecrackers lay on the table next to the men and in boxes at their feet. Vicente, they call it those in a box. I don't want too much material lying around. I was just about to do that, Mama, Vicente answers, spotting me as he turns to face Nuri. Vicente, whom I now realize is Nuri's son, rises from his chair to welcome me with a double kiss. Claiming the now free chair to make good on her promise to show me how quickly she can tie, Nuri begins tying a cluster of firecrackers together as Vicente explains the process to me. We're preparing the arañas, Vicente says, clutching a handful of spider legs to show me how individual gunpowder-coated wicks become the clusters of chained firecrackers that make up a mascletà. These are the wicks that link the truenos, but each of the firecrackers has its own estopín, retention, that burns for 2, 3, or 4 seconds. That's what gives the mascletà its rhythm. The retentions that delay the explosion of individual firecrackers mean the difference between rhythmic artistry and life-threatening chain reactions. Vicente, why don't you join us? Nuri asks. Vicente nods, accepting Nuri's invitation to accompany us around the property. He clears off his workstation before joining us outside. The next workspace reveals the large tumblers used to mix the materials that fill each firecracker. Vicente lowers a clipboard from the wall to show me the formulas that dictate these mixtures, many of which are the same ones used by his great-grandparents who opened the pirotecnia in the 1930s. Nuri explains that the fineness of the powder that these machines produce determines the sonic effect of each firecracker, which, quote, seems ridiculous, but you really get to know what qualities produce which effects, because this is every day. The mascletà, it seems, is not just an intercorporeal experience for its spectators. It also culminates a journey that begins at the hands of Nuri and her team, forging an intimate relationship between pyrotechnicians and their listeners that is mediated through explosive noise. These intimacies reach beyond those gathered in daily crowds at City Hall and extend backward through several decades of mascletades and more broadly through the rich tradition of pyrotechnics in the Valencian community. The skills passed from generation to generation at Pirotecnia Nadal Martí situate Nuri and her family in a centuries-long, multi-sided history of pyrotechnics, wherein, according to Simon Werrett, scientific and artistic techniques combined in performance to further knowledge in both realms. Pyrotechnics, Werrett claims, are a privileged site where the relationships between art and science can be discerned. But it is also a domain wherein interpersonal relationships materialize and shape the ways of knowing that emerge in explosive performance. As an art form honed through shared practice, pyrotechnics create the grounds for a sentir space that makes tangible the relationships and values that shape their very fabrication. As we make our way toward the middle of the compound, Vicente guides me to the stacks of trays holding empty tubes ready to be filled to make whistling firecrackers. Loading a single tray of containers into a daunting machine that warns caution, risk of entrapment, Vicente brushes clay over the empty tubes and shakes the tray back and forth to ensure a clean fill. We should test some of the finished ones, no? Vicente asks, pausing mid-process. Sure, yeah, but you test them, Nuri says with a chuckle, wanting to keep her distance from the piercing screech of the pitos. We head a safe distance away from the workshops to a small patch of earth tucked between the main building and the entrance. Mounting the first pito in place, Vicente touches his cigarette to the long wick that extends upward from the firecracker. A small flame traces the contours of the wick until it reaches the firecracker's surface, sparking a stream of metallic debris and a high-pitched whistle that scrapes at the upper edges of my hearing. And of course, someone else gets involved.
Estos son desamors.
Es el primero.
Está acostumbrado. Y así es para fumar que está el teu fill.
Sí, a la parte está. Él dice que es el primero.
Quote, he loves it, it's fine, he loves it. Satisfied with the screech, Nuri and Vicente exchange nods of approval, and we continue toward the storage area where shelves of finished firecrackers line the perimeter of the room. You have to have enough materials for today and tomorrow, Nuri comments. You never know what tomorrow will bring, even if you have your own manufacturing site. It's challenging to work in the pyrotechnic industry then, I ask, knowing the answer. For so many reasons, Vicente replies. First, there's the sheer danger of it. Even the smallest shifts in chemistry, manufacturing, and other factors can cause drastically different effects, which makes the job impossibly meticulous. You have to have it in your blood, Nuri adds. You're either really committed or you won't last. And it's a challenging lifestyle too, I ask. Vicente's exasperated sigh answers for him. It's a lot of hours, it's a lot of weekends. What's troubling for me, Nuri says, is that no one wants to continue it as a profession. How can you teach this stuff? It's too dangerous and too difficult for any kind of school. It depends entirely on family ties and a personal desire to continue the trade. I would never force my sons to stay in this world, but this business would close the minute they decide not to. A cluster of people, dressed in all black, crowds the entrance to Madrid's City Hall, their chatter transforming into visible puffs in the chilly February air. I approach three flag-wielding protesters whose green banners proclaim the acronym PACMA, Partido Animalista con el Medio Ambiente, Animalist Party for the Environment. Their raised eyebrows and soft smiles invite my question about their perspectives on Madrid's first ever Mascletà. Well, the man to my right begins, here in Madrid we have no pyrotechnic tradition. That exists in another Spanish community. And everyone, well, not everyone, and that's important, knows the consequences of the Mascletà and of pyrotechnics in general. Not only animals, but sensitive people, including people with autism, can have panic attacks. It does a lot of harm. Aside from that, it's nonsense that thousands of euros are being spent on something that has no tradition here. It's not even time for the Mascletà where there is a pyrotechnic tradition. It makes no sense. And the place they've chosen to do it has such biodiversity, of birds specifically, but also of other animals, and the Mascletà is going to scare them away. That's why we're doing another protest tomorrow, right before the Mascletà. It just doesn't make sense to us, and as always, it harms the most sensitive groups. I guess I'll say, adds the man to my left, that I'm positive the person in charge of this show has some kind of personal relationship with the mayor or one of his associates. We already know this local government well. The People's Party does not care at all about the animals. The only thing that matters to them is a positive public opinion of the party. The protesters' critique, common among opponents to Madrid's Mascletà, who label it as a political stunt on the part of the capital's conservative mayor, resonates with what Michaela J. Stinson calls tourism-related atmospheric infrastructures, designed to impose normalized collective structures of feeling that authorize and make some tourism worlds more dominant than others. In the case of the Mascletà, the People's Party wields a familiar, beloved pyrotechnic act, one that, because it belongs to Valencia, can be enjoyed in Madrid as a form of domestic tourism, to secure positive public reputation and invalidate concerns about the environment and residents' well-being. But the Mascletá's rootedness in Valencia also informs the protesters' tradition-based arguments against the display. When sounded out of place, the Mascletà is stripped of its ritual value, marking the limitations of the Mascletá's capacity to be felt, heard, where its noise no longer makes sense. With 20 minutes to go, TV reporters and their camera crews begin arriving to cover the event. Among the many Spanish-language titles plastered on their equipment, one graphic catches my eye, Apunt, the flagship Valencian language broadcasting network of the Valencian Media Corporation. If the protest had seemed like an isolated event restricted to the socio-political sphere of Spain's capital city, its connections to Valencian cultural politics are now too palpable to ignore. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice calls. I turn to face the center of the crowd. A man with a graying ponytail and an anima naturalis sweatshirt, the same man I had seen earlier talking to journalists and handing out press briefs, holds up a megaphone to address the crowd, which now numbers close to 100. If we can't stop the Mascletà from happening, we can at least make our voices heard. I recognize we're all angry and frustrated, but we shouldn't resort to insults or physical force. We're not like them, so everything we'll say today will be with respect. 12 steady chimes ring out above the crowd, and another organizer takes up the megaphone to kick off a stream of chants that declares the physical and sonic presence of the protest. The following day, I arrive at the cement plaza that surrounds the Puente del Rey, where a battalion of police vans, cars, and motorbikes awaits an even larger crowd. I survey the scene to identify the ideal vantage point, when suddenly a familiar sound cuts through the noise. No a la Mascletà! With the same bright yellow #Sin Pirotechnia banners waving above them as yesterday, the protesters boo as those affiliated with today's show pass through the blue metal gates that lead to the detonation zone. As if in direct retaliation, those gathered on my side of the improvised corridor cheer enthusiastically for the pyrotechnicians, firefighters, and members of the press that pass us by. Unlike the organized group of protesters, easily identifiable in sound and shared organization logos, the supporters surrounding me are difficult to classify. Some sport blue and white neckerchiefs typical of the Falles Festival, but are they Valencian? They're just booing. They don't even know who these people are. A surprising oppositional voice emerges from the protesters' area. Unison chants dissolve into indecipherable objections at a similar volume but with pointed antagonism. 2 police officers remove the offending party before the conflict can turn physical, relocating him directly in front of me. I take several steps backwards to distance myself from the instigator, only to encounter another argument brewing behind me. A representative from the protest speaks with local news stations, voicing the group's discontent with marked verbal emphasis. The Mascletà should have been held in the Plaza Mayor, so the mayor would have to put up with it himself. If you don't want to deal with the Mascletà, you can just leave, retorts a bystander in Valencian Catalan. Not hearing the Mascletà doesn't resolve the repercussions it will have for the environment and the animals, the protester responds in Spanish. Once the Mascletà is over, replies the second man, whose neon t-shirt displays the name of his Falles commission, you and I will go together to count how many dead ducks there are. The noisy fractures of yesterday's protest now begin to rupture open. While the demonstration in front of Madrid City Hall relied on straightforward tactics of sonic interruptivity, today's confrontations reveal a sonic scar in the making between animal rights activists, neighborhood coalitions, pro-festivity madrileños, and Valencian-speaking falleres, each becoming one another's noisy others. In the process, these groups voice and redefine the interregional relationships that fill the Mascletá's intangible archive. Pyrotechnics, protest, and political discourse become the foundation for the sentir space that surrounds today's Mascletà, establishing the competing community values that shape the Mascletá's manifestation as noise. The protesters shift from chanting to synchronized shouts, Individual challengers embrace this chorus as an invitation to respond, interjecting passive aggressions as the protesters change phrases. Some of the counter-protesters defiantly exalt València, revealing the Mascletá's near-synonymous relationship with the region. Others point out that in using megaphones, sirens, and whistles to voice their disagreement, the protesters are effectively fighting noise with noise. While the difference in scale between a single megaphone and the detonation of over 300 kilograms of gunpowder nearly invalidates this argument, it does reveal noise's capacity to facilitate critical dialogue. In its deployment of noise's sentir space, Madrid's Mascletà and its supporters enact what Steve Goodman calls a politics of frequency, by exploiting the affective tone that allows certain frequencies of sound to enact control over communities of bodies. But the protesters' response shows that this control does not go unchallenged. Their remarks generate a counter-politics of frequency and resist the dominant positive attachments to the Mascletá's noisy spectacle. Because the Mascletà unavoidably draws these protesters, politicians, and pyrotechnicians into relation, the intangible archive that results from their competing frequencies articulates the fragmented nature of this sentir space and its noisy counterpublics. I eye my watch in anticipation of the first warning shot, but 12:50 comes and goes. Are they skipping the warning shots entirely? Several seconds past 12:52, the first warning shot startles me more than most. The first victims have now died, a protester calls out. Derisive laughter sounds around me in return. When 1 o'clock arrives, a stream of whistles and the meandering whine of a siren compete with the puffs of colorful smoke and calculated blasts erupting across the bridge. A crescendo of booms suggests the earthquake is near, but neither the ground nor my body shake. A wall of gray billows above the bridge, but the echoes of explosions reach my ears with underwhelming delay. Applause, whistles, and sirens fill the gap of silence that usually concludes the Mascletà. Spectators begin to break apart, but arguments continue across the camps. The insults turn from political to personal, and a man near me taunts a protester across the way with a pointed sexist remark. Other witnesses to the exchange join me in calling the attention of a nearby police officer, alerting him to the perpetrator. Don't provoke them, man. This doesn't matter anyway. I reach my breaking point. I abandon all pretenses of research and flee toward the metro as quickly as the gridlocked masses will let me. Once on board, muffled recordings of explosions emit from the devices of those seated around me. I cover my ears to shut out the noise. I squint as I pan the plaza until red lettering on an otherwise inconspicuous sign directs me toward the installation I had been searching for. I enter the alcove to find an explanatory note in Valencian Catalan plastered to the wall. The installation recreates a Mascletà on a sonic scale made through samples of diverse sounds that are articulated generatively to create a new way of seeing this event, which is immaterial heritage of the city. The work unfolds in a space of sensorial privacy wherein the spectator and listener are surrounded by darkness so as to sharpen the sense of hearing, capable of making us move and vibrate with the emotional potency of this pyrotechnic act. The project seeks to turn the Mascletà on its head and interpret it from a contemporary perspective and through conceptual, musical, and sonic deconstruction, making us reflect on its place in society and how we construct tradition, legacy, and collective identity through listening. A slow rumble emanates from behind the black curtain that hangs to the right of this description, and my curiosity takes over. Pulling back the folds of velvet, I cross into the threshold, into the darkened installation space, and pow! An all-encompassing boom reverberates around me, seemingly triggered by my presence. A chain of firecrackers ensues, jumping wildly between high and low registers. What quickly catches my attention, however, are the enduring echoes that these bursts bring with them. Each chirp, crack, and roar leaves a trail of sound that never quite seems to dissipate, lingering in the background of my hearing until another rush of sound comes to overtake it. darkness of the room contrasts sharply with the excess of sounds that fill the space. The more time I spend listening, the more unsettled I become from the lack of visual stimuli. The installation seems to confirm the Mascletá's multisensory nature. When isolated to a single sense, the resulting feeling is far from the full-body thrill I usually experience at City Hall. After several minutes, the latent rumbles I'd heard before entering the space return, and I take this as my cue to exit. The installation presents the Mascletà not through high-fidelity recordings of the pyrotechnic display, but as an aggregate of the many sounds that populate Valencia's festive sentir space. It relocates the Mascletá's intangible archive from City Hall Plaza to its peripheries, allowing for the contemplation of its archive by separating it from its sound source. The kinds of listening for which the installation's creators call approximates what Jean-Luc Nassid identifies as the simultaneous hearing understanding of listening, a straining toward a possible meaning, and consequently one that is not immediately accessible. The project's title also suggests such an oral orientation. In a creative wordplay on the Valencian Catalan word sentiment, or feeling, the individual words that make up the title are sent, a conjugated form of sentir, or feel here, and ment, mind or understanding. As the listener experiences sentiment, they are encouraged to make sense of what they feel here, transforming the Mascletá's sentir space into new ways of knowing and understanding Valencia and its sounds. I exit the space and return to the throngs of festival goers, all seemingly headed in the same direction. It's almost 2 o'clock already. As I join the masses preparing to experience another day's Mascletà in City Hall Plaza, I reflect on the mutual relationship between sound and urban space that the installation makes audible, and wonder whether I will feel here today's Mascletà differently with Sentiment's framework for listening in my mind's ear. If, as Roland Atkinson suggests, sounds subtly influence our patterns of sociability, modes of transport, and interactions in urban space, these same patterns shape how we make sense of sound. Sentiment succeeds in shedding a light on the noisy relationship between sound and space, revealing the work of sound in structuring the relationships that fill the city's intangible archive. As an intangible archive of relation, noise projects the temporal, spatial, and mediated relationships that constitute it. And in the case of the Mascletà, these relationships coalesce to form the sentir space, wherein individuals establish their sonic and communal values to forge a sense of belonging with or against one another. The conflicting nature of these values reveals the inherently fragmented nature of the Mascletà and its intangible archive. For Nuri and Vicente, the Mascletà should be valued for the skill, dedication, and danger it involves. For the creators of Sentiment, the value of the Mascletà lies in its capacity to facilitate a kind of social listening, revealing the role of sonic heritage in collective tradition and identity. Approaching the Mascletà through the lens of the Madrid protests throws these values into even sharper relief. The ritual value of the Mascletà depends so firmly on its rootedness in the Valencian context that outside of these conditions, the Mascletà becomes the grounds to articulate the limits of regional and political ties. As a repository of its artistic, embodied, symbolic, and ritual values, the Mascletá's sentir space allows for members of and outsiders to the Valencian community to negotiate how these values inform the configuration of the relationships that connect them. To paraphrase Lauren Berlant, the Mascletà is both a set of values and the affect that makes these values meaningful. The collective relationships encompassed within the Mascletá's intangible archive not only shape the Mascletá's possibilities as a sensorial event. These relationships are projected through the Mascletá's multisensory spectrum as listeners feel, hear its noise. The generational relationships that link Nuri and Vicente both to their family's pyrotechnic past and to Valencia's pyrotechnic history are the foundation for the felt-heard effects that send shockwaves through spectators' bodies. The regional tensions between Valencia and Madrid and the political party that currently unites them reinforce the cultural basis on which the Mascletà makes meaning for its listeners, who interpret the Mascletá's noise against a rubric of regional tradition. The relationships between the Mascletà as sensorial event and its representations in sound and discourse shape how the Mascletà is known in the moment of its firing. In its range of intermaterial guises, as chemical reaction, heritage, pollution, tradition, sound art, ritual, the Mascletà forms an intangible archive of relation that cultivates a sense of belonging and unbelonging within the many communities that crosscut its sentir space. Because the Mascletá's cycles of presence and non-presence recur year after year, the contours of these communities shapeshift in accordance with the changing relationships the Mascletà calls into being. In its distinct temporal, spatial, and mediated modes, the Mascletà creates and transforms the relationships that constitute and circumscribe the Valencian community. Gracias.
I think we do have time for questions. I just want to remind everybody there are events tomorrow. There's a lunch with the faculty, there's a meeting with the graduate students, and there's a book party. I think all the authors are here. We're going to be celebrating authors from our department tomorrow, and Rachel will be at the book party and at the reception. There's a lot of opportunities to talk to her one-on-one, but we are open for questions. Do you want to field them yourself? Do you want me to field them?
Yeah. There we went. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you, that was brilliant. Thanks for taking us to Valencia.
Yeah.
Can you just give us an idea of how old the tradition is and how unique to Valencia?
Yes, the pyrotechnic tradition specifically, yeah. So pyrotechnics in general date back to the 13th century, more or less. They really got their start in China and very quickly moved over to Europe in 15th, early 16th century. In Valencia specifically, we know for sure that it was present at least in the 16th century, because there is documentation of like the government being upset about pyrotechnicians. And so once there was a ban on it, we can prove that it was there, right? So it's been around since at least the 16th century. The Mascletà specifically is an outgrowth of at least the mid-19th century. And it is, at least according to every Valencian I have ever spoken to, very much a Valencian thing. And specifically, they will cling to the fact that it is a midday spectacle that follows that outline that I showed at the beginning. Although, if you ask a pyrotechnician, they will tell you that mascletades can happen at night, and it's still a mascletà as long as it follows that outline. So that genre of pyrotechnics really is embraced as something that is specifically Valencian. Do other people have pyrotechnics during the day? Sure, probably, but it's really that outline and that those sort of genre expectations. I return to the word genre because it really feels like almost like a musical genre without really being capital N music in the same way, right? But that really is understood to be very much a Valencian thing, despite similar traditions existing in Italy and otherwhere in the Mediterranean.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Me?
Yeah, you.
I want to know about those sculptures.
Sure.
Paper-mache?
Everybody wants to know. Great question. They purportedly are paper mache. Mostly they are made now of polystyrene, to everyone's dismay, because they burn so disgustingly, and there's like these billowing black clouds. I mean, you saw it in the fire picture, right? So the failes of old, we'll say the early 1900s, were made of wood or wax, typically, and that changed throughout the 1900s as the festival itself changed in focus from what it began as, which was just a bunch of neighbors throwing trash in the street and setting it on fire, to somebody made it look like one of their neighbors and ha ha ha, how funny, ha ha, and then it became this, right? And so as the festival itself sort of transformed from very much just a spring cleaning kind of a rite to an artistic, we're really going to value the artistic merit of these sculptures, that was what sort of sparked the change in materials. So they looked for materials that could give greater clarity of detail, that could withstand the elements for longer, right? So they're painted, and the paint is obviously made to withstand that, but the materials themselves would deteriorate in earlier decades, sorry. But now it's doing a sort of boomerang where people are working away from that polystyrene because of the environmental effects. So that is encouraged through a series of prizes that are used in the regional government to sort of encourage people to do specific things with these things. So there are prizes just for, the most beautiful monument, of course, but there are prizes for the people who have the greenest faida, or the cleanest burn. And so those tend to be with much more expensive, but much more environmentally friendly materials. All of that to say, yes, paper mache and also a lot of other things.
Have you been to Mardi Gras World in New Orleans?
No, regrettably.
They make these big statues like
Yeah.
that in a particular location, and they look like that. So They look a lot like that, actually.
Yeah,
don't they?
I bet there has to be
They're on
influence
floats.
in how they're made, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if this is fully formed yet, but riff on it, if you will.
Great, sure, happily.
So I'm thinking about Tim Ingold's critique of soundscape, right? And one of his points in that is that for him, sound is not an object, but a medium through which hearing occurs. And I'm wondering if your interlocutors would agree with that, or are they, and in that case, are they listening through sound to this intangible archive you highlight, or is sound for them the object of perception?
That's a great question. I'm going to take one step back from that question and then hopefully arrive at your question, which is that for better or for worse, very few people talk to me about any of this in terms of sound. The sound part is kind of the me aspect of all of this. I mean, it seems clear to me why you might consider this sound. And I guess any given spectator that you talk to about the Mascletà, they will tell you how it sounds, right? That gets confusing sometimes when people say they're going to see the Mascletà. So sometimes the senses get a little mixed there. But that to say, I think what draws me to breaking down something like the Mascletà, which is such a sensory spectacle, into its sort of component parts, into the very material world of how it's made, into the social aspects of the rejection of the very materiality of how it's made, and sort of the sonic abstraction of that in a sound installation is because it can't really be distilled as sound as object. So I think in their own way, anybody I would talk to about this would agree with the sort of sound as process, sound as not like a fixed thing that you can experience or feel or sense, I guess, right? But it's all of this and more, all wrapped up in that. I don't know if that really answers your question. That was the riff. You asked me for a riff. Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by the protest aspect, of course, because that's
What a surprise.
what interests me most. And I loved your citational practice throughout this talk. The Goodman was absolutely well placed. But the Cusick and the Daughtry text, I think, would be really useful in thinking through the Madrid responses and reactions. Because what we learned in the War on Terror is that sound and music are awesome ways to terrorize people and to torture them. And what we learned is that it had a very different effect on the soldiers than it did on the victims of the torture, based on Daughtry's concept of forced resonance and Cusick's concept of involuntary auditors. If you control the volume, the sound doesn't terrorize you. If you have no control over the volume, the sound terrorizes you. And it's that notion of sovereignty that Goodman talks about that defines the difference between we love the Mascletà and this is an assault on us and we are held victim to it.
Yeah.
And so it's, of course we know sound and sovereignty are linked, and it's not simply exposure to these loud sounds, but it is the sovereignty aspect of who controls them, who identifies with them, who hears their past, their heritage, their future, and who hears those noisy others we wish would shut the hell up.
Yeah.
And I think the Daughtry text on sonic landscapes, and in particular involuntary auditors, gives you an interesting way of teasing out his case study, which was, of course, the use of sound to terrorize people in the Iraq Wars.
Right.
And the Madrid folks who we might look down our nose as entitled white folks, gentrifying sonicascapes, you know, the way that our own Ali Martin talks about. Or we could also think through the ways in which their reactions are relative to a power relationship for which they are uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all of that. I mean, of course, this is a much reduced version of a chapter that's like 4 times as long as this, but yes, that's absolutely a point well taken. 2 things that come to mind as maybe like, I would love to hear your thoughts about maybe in relation to that. In terms of controlling the volume, I hadn't thought about it in this particular way until you just said it with those terms, but folks in the like pyrotechnic manufacturing world have talked to me a lot about how as much as you plan, as much as you test individual firecrackers, you really can't know what's going to happen until it actually happens, right? And so it makes me think a little bit differently about the sense of control. Of course, they are completely in control over the design, where it goes, the types of firecrackers that are used, they're really in control of that, but the volatility of what they're using is such that no one ever really has full control. I mean, the rain has some control, right? Like the way that it was transported in a truck has some control, right? So that was not an aspect of this that I had thought about adding here.
Maybe it's not control, but an expectation.
Sure, yeah.
So someone who grew up in this tradition would very much understand the lack of control as being part of the dopamine rush they receive when they experience it.
Right.
And that expectation, it satisfies their expectation. So it's not control, but it satisfies their expectation of not having control in very what we would consider culturally important ways. Whereas for the Madrid folks, they don't have that experience, nor could they even get to a place where they can understand that expectation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, for additional like contextual information maybe about what happened in Madrid, so the people doing the show, of course, were Valencian. They were not like some random Madrid pyrotechnicians that all of a sudden came out of they don't exist in Madrid, right? So these were Valencians hired to come, which a lot of Valencians saw as a sort of like cultural diplomacy kind of a thing, like how wonderful that our thing is being brought to, right? Yeah. Then there was sort of the opposite response, which was, wow, look, Madrid's doing it again. If they have the best flamenco, they have the best fabada, they have the best whatever, of course they have the best Mascletà, because it was also the loudest and most gunpowder that has ever been used in a Mascletà. It was like the biggest and baddest Mascletà that's ever happened. So yeah, there's a lot of threads here that make it a very complex thing to analyze as a sort of cultural moment, and it's the only time it's ever happened. So it's such an outlier too, which makes it really interesting, right? It was only 2024, like this was very recent, so it's very rich. I'll move on because I could probably keep talking about this forever, but yeah, Julian.
Thanks, this was super interesting.
Thank you.
Terrified by this photograph that you gave us.
Yeah.
Questions kind of in a similar vein to what Davey was asking about, but I guess I was really curious thinking about the kind of family business who are working up really close to all those chemicals.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if there's any like documented health effects, right? And if they have any kind of sort of complicated relationship with their industry rather than just saying, yes, it's our family tradition that's been passed down, or if there's any sort of, I don't know, complicated issue there. And then secondly, I want to ask you about animal rights, but we'll do that one.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to talk about that. I actually don't know. I'm happy to like quickly and tell you I don't know. I think what I can speak on that's maybe slightly related to this is that there is a deep knowledge of the tragedies that have happened on pyrotechnic manufacturing sites, right? Like, I mean, Nerdy told me tons of stories about like when, there used to be, I want to say 13 manufacturing sites in that town, like one town, and they're the only ones left. But when there were that many, I mean, stories would happen every other day of somebody, a thing didn't go as planned, or somebody wasn't where they were supposed to be, or the chemicals got mixed in a way. And also if the chemicals are like left out in the wrong conditions, right? Something will happen that's not expected. So that is very much in, I mean, both in sort of like the actual memory and in sort of the collective memory of the just inherent sheer danger to all of it. And that really is the driving factor behind a lot of people deciding to leave it, deciding to, move on with it. And then, I mean, there are the other like sort of adrenaline junkies that are absolutely drawn to that kind of a thing, right? My favorite example of which are these two Dutch guys that I met who don't speak any Spanish whatsoever. They speak English though, so they could talk to me, and they were like, yeah, we like barely know these people, but we really love this stuff, man. We're like really hyped to be here, and they've been working for them for like 5 years, and they can't speak to each other, but they're just really amped to be there. All of this to say, that doesn't answer the health aspects of this, but it's that proximity to death, really, that on either side of that really is a major factor here, both positively and negatively. It's a great question, though, about the health effect. I wonder if that has even really been robustly studied. It might be something that is so untouchable in Valencia that I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't much on it. There's really not even that much on, like, the pollution elements of this here or anything that you would expect to have, like, robust studies done about. Do you want to ask your animal rights question, or is that like a just us question?
I just want to know more about it, right?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, a couple things were really interesting to me. I was curious if these are like pre-existing animal rights groups who are then attaching themselves to this cause, or if this is like a group of people who are formulating specifically around this event. And then to be quite frank, it was really interesting to me when you said that they were so interested in being respectful in their dialogue, because frankly in the United States, I would not say that's always the case with animal rights.
Yeah, sure.
So I just
Shout out to PETA.
just like a little bit
yeah, so these are 100% well-formed existing people. The signs that you see here are the existing groups. So there's Podemos is a political group. So these are like animal rights activists who are part of Podemos, which is it's a sort of leftist, center leftist liberal group. These folks are Anima Naturalis. This is PACMA, like I said. So these are existing structures of folks. The respectful thing is an interesting one, right? Like, I think this was the vibe here because it was just protesters. There was nobody around that wasn't here for this. I mean, to paint the broader scene of this picture, this circle of the semicircle of folks, these are the protesters. I'm standing in the semicircle of like the spectator protesters who are like afraid to say anything but are watching and going, yeah, go you. So here, there was nobody to be mad at, really, which I think was their point. It was sort of like, we're not going to rise to their level. We know that they have all kinds of gross tactics. The other part of this protest that I don't have the time to talk about, or didn't have the time to talk about, is that there were a lot of prepared speeches as part of this protest as well, many of whom brought up the fact that the political representatives, both in Madrid and in Valencia, had some really choice things to say about these people. And they were like, backward, they're hillbillies, how dare they think this about the Mascletà, no duck has ever died in Valencia, was one of the things. So I think partially it was also in response to that, right? Like, we're not going to play their game, we're going to be, and then we're not going to stoop to their level, basically, I think, is the vibe. Whether they are that way in all of their advocacy, I don't know. But in this particular case, they were. Did you ask me, was there another part of that question? Okay. Yeah, venga.
Thank you, Dr. Oana. I was
Thank you.
at a point I was trying to understand how you were actually receiving those sounds, especially the huge decibel, but also maybe that's part of the ethnographic experience of the movement. But the question I actually want to ask is, you mentioned a part of the compositional choices that is being made in how they organize the fireworks. I don't know if I missed out something in the process, but I'd like you to talk to me a bit if there's a training process behind that, you know, for people to know how to really organize that. I'm actually interested in that. Maybe there is not, but
yeah, that's a great question. To speak to the first part of your like half question, I think, which is like, how do you deal with all of this? I wear AirPods every single time. Am I the only one with ear protection? Yes. Is it terrifying? Yes. How are they alive? Unclear. Are there a lot of stores that sell hearing aids right near this plaza? Also yes. To answer your second question, so I can speak the most detailed about Nuria and Vicente and her son, his brother Diego, who is really the lead pyrotechnic. Actually, well, let me show you. Let me show you Diego before I start talking about him. Where is he? Here's Diego. That guy over there. That guy's one of the Dutch guys, the guy with the broken arm. There he is. So that's Diego. You can see him at his computer. He's doing the digital elements here. So the digital elements of this show are sort of all of these yellow cables, all affixed to XLR boxes that are all situated outside of the cage. Anyway, so the real story I can speak about in training terms is of Diego, who was, as Nuri tells it to me, was the one who really took the company from the old school to the new school, aka from manual to digital, which has a lot of implications for safety. Of course, if it's digital, you can be much further away from the fireworks themselves, and so it was a big change in that regard, but also in the level of specificity of rhythm that you can get with digital firings, right? Because you're not running around the cage actively lighting stuff on fire and hoping that it lights at the right time, right? And so his training, I kid you not, was watching a bunch of videos on YouTube. To learn from stuff that's like similar in pyrotechnic world, going on in China, going on in Italy, going on in these sort of big pyrotechnic hubs. Literally learning on the job. I mean, he's like just actively latching, oh, that's so cool, I wonder how they did that, and then talking to those people, and really just like a DIY kind of a training process. As far as I understand it, he is the only one that does this work at the Pirotecnia, and I have the sense that that's pretty similar across Valencia, that there's really one lead person who's doing the designs, and everyone else sort of has their tasks of either manufacturing or setting up the show, or testing or filling or whatever their one specific task is. So those tasks, of course, can be taught on the job. That's very much, here's the formula, here's how you do it, don't blow yourself up, good luck out there. But this aspect, the design aspect, I mean, there's no, like Nerdy said, there's no school for it, right? You learn from whomever you can talk to about this tradition. That to say, his is the story I know best, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the story that most people have, I guess, would be my answer to that.
I mean, look at the size of
About the
people.
topic?
Yeah.
What's he talking about my
It's a
topic?
very
I'm just
small
saying like
subject,
what
and this is
like
all
1 ounce
flowers.
happened.
Oh, everything else.
Like that day, like
Yeah.